So, hello everyone, and good afternoon to all of you who have taken time out of your days to join us today. Good afternoon also to my co-panelists and to the teams from South Pole and Eco Business. A very warm welcome to our virtual session today, where we will be discussing about corporate net zero journeys and what does ambitious action and credible communication look like. My name is Shruti Singh, and I'm the Regional Director for Climate Advisory for Asia Pacific at South Pole, and I'm based in Singapore. I will be one of your panelists for today. And South Pole is really proud to partner with Eco Business for organizing this event for you today. Now, for those of you who do not know about South Pole, we are a leading climate solutions provider, and we develop and implement emission reduction strategies and projects for different companies, for governments, and for other organizations around the world. We were founded in 2006, primarily as a carbon projects developer, and since then we have over 1,000 projects in more than 50 countries. Over the last 7 years, we have expanded our suite of offerings, and we are now a full-service solutions provider, and our team of now more than 1,100 climate experts across the globe supports different organizations and corporates on their entire corporate sustainability journeys. And of course, we work very, very actively with the governments and nonprofits as well. So you could say that we've got our boots on the ground as well as in the boardroom, as we are into both strategy as well as implementation. So I believe all of you attending this event today here would agree with me that corporate climate action is an absolutely essential ingredient when it comes to tackling the climate crisis that lies in front of us. And if we look around today, we do see a lot of action happening around us. We see businesses who are stepping up by setting some very bold targets, by implementing solutions, by greening their operations. But I think in the middle of all this, it still deserves a little thought. Is all this action around us happening at the pace at which it is needed, and also at the scale at which it is needed? Now, South Pole's own research on the state of corporate net zero commitments and progress has found that among the sustainability-minded organizations, the trajectory for net zero is actually quite positive. More and more organizations are setting net zero targets in place today, and increasingly these targets are also being backed up by science-based targets. We also see that many of these organizations are also increasing the budgets that they want to allocate towards meeting their net zero goals. However, our research also found a very surprising trend among these climate leaders. Nearly a quarter of these surveyed climate leaders are deciding not to publicize their targets beyond what's mandated, a phenomenon that can also be referred to as green hushing. So why is this happening? Why are companies choosing to not be vocal about the targets that they're setting and about the actions that they're taking regarding the climate crisis? And what issues could this potentially lead to? How can these leading companies really set examples for other companies in their industries or in their value chains by talking openly about their actions in a credible and in a transparent way, and sharing about the challenges that they faced along this journey as much as they share about their success stories? So I'm very excited to hear more on this and learn from the experiences and insights shared by my co-panelists today, and as much as share South Pole's own perspective from our experience of working with thousands of companies on their own climate journeys. So without further ado, let me hand over to Ami Firdaus from Eco Business, who's going to be our moderator for today to introduce our co-panelists and to get the session started. Thank you, Ami, and over to you.
Thank you, Shruti. That was wonderful. Indeed, I think without a doubt, corporate climate action is an essential ingredient, as you put it, in the larger concoction of climate action that we have to be all part of globally. And also, I think we just like what you've highlighted in terms of the green hush trend, I'm also looking forward to hearing more about that from our panelists as well, in terms of how companies can move forward with action and communication on their targets and what they plan to do to reach their net zero ambitions and their goals. So before I actually introduce our esteemed panelists for today, I'd like to actually turn to the audience, to all of you, to help us frame this discussion. So we're going to poll you. We're going to ask you a question on what you think. So first of all, before I even launch into that, please, you can actually access this slider.com QR code. You know how we love our QR codes these days. So in there, you can actually see the question that we have for you to frame the discussion moving forward, right? So the question is, if you can see it once you're in, what is the one thing that corporate climate leaders can do today to set a good example for others? That could be in terms of the industry, in terms of the value chain, whatever perspective that you have, that you offer as someone who is concerned about sustainability, as we all are in this room. Please plonk it in, and we hope to see this word cloud forming. All right. Okay, so while that word cloud is forming on the screen, and all of you can actually see that happening live, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. So I'm very excited to have these three panelists covering a very broad range of industries and perspectives, from B2B, B2C, B2G, what have you. We have Victoria Tan, who is head of the Group Risk Management and Sustainability Unit at Ayala Corporation. Thanks for joining us, Vicky. We also have Tan Suhan, who is the head of sustainability and as well as the deputy general manager of sustainable urban renewal at Keppel Land. Thank you for joining us, Suhan. We also have, you've heard from her already, but I'd like to introduce her formally. It is Shruti Singh, who is regional director and head of climate strategies at APAC at South Pole. Thanks for joining us and making the time, Shruti. Finally, last but definitely not least, we have Mr. Sebastian Pivet, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at AS Watson. So this is our lineup for today, and I'm just excited as you are to kick us off for the next 90 minutes. It's not exactly a World Cup match, but it's still going to be a riveting 90 minutes, all right? Okay, so let's look at the cloud, okay? Before we launch into our first question, right? I'm basically seeing accountability screaming at us on the screen. So that's one. Also, we see action, climate linked appraisal, and transparency. I think that really rounds up what is immediately grabbing my attention. Thank you, audience, for participating in that. And I hope that this really informs our discussion moving forward. So without further ado, my first question to Vicky, Suhan, and Sebastian, to the three of you, representing a wide range of experience and perspective. I want to hear from you. What has been the main challenge, or what have been the main challenges and successes of your company's current climate journey, and where is it headed? Perhaps, Vicky, if you don't mind, we will start with you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that, and thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. So probably I will start off. Ayala Corporation is a very diversified conglomerate in the Philippines. So we are into 11 verticals as we speak right now. So the main challenge really is how to rally the whole group to this climate ambition. And the diversity of the industry sectors that we are in, there will be a lot of challenges into that, because there will be sectoral pathways that we have to consider before we can develop a group-wide Ayala climate ambition roadmap. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is in terms of understanding the terms in relation to the gold standard of setting the ambition. Like, what is really net zero? What does it mean? And how are we going to use the term in our communications moving forward? It took us actually 8 months to identify the right service provider for the group. And for transparency, as we have seen the word in the cloud earlier, it's South Pole who's helping us. So it took us 8 months just to pinpoint the right service provider that will help us in this climate ambition. We started talking about the possibility of setting up target in 2016, when we have seen the increase in our greenhouse gas emission because one of the coal plants actually went online. And so everyone was shocked when we saw the scope 1 emission for the group. And we decided early on that we have to do something about it. That was 2016. Well, I don't expect everyone to have the same journey. As I mentioned, we have different industry sector. But I guess the success is when you put everyone on the same page about the importance and the impact of climate change to the business. So now let's talk about the how-tos. So we had that clear understanding of where we want to go. And that is to have that commitment to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. And then we had a series of educational awareness programs at the board level, at the senior management level, down to the last probably employee within the group. And that means because if we are aligned to one thing, that means everyone can move forward, and that is actually leadership. In terms of success, we put up leading measures so we know if we are tracking quite well, and we celebrate those small successes as we create momentum towards the development of the climate ambition for the Ayala Group. Now, I turn it over to you now, Ami.
Thank you, Vicky, and certainly I think we'd love to hear more on how you've translated at Ayala these targets into action. I think later on we're going to look further into that lane. Sebastian, I'd like to hear from you next on these challenges and successes that you've had on this journey.
Thank you very much, Ami. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll start very briefly, giving insight a little bit on AS Watson Group. So we are a large health and beauty retailer. We are in 28 markets, essentially in Europe and Asia. And in this part of the world, I'm based in Hong Kong. We basically know all about maybe Watson's, the chemist. So we have a lot of different, I would say, formats. We're not just in health and beauty retail. We also do manufacturing of drinks. We have a food retail in Hong Kong. We have an electronic business and a wine business as well in Hong Kong. So a very complex, I would say, group of companies. Over the last few years, I would say our main challenge was around measuring our Scope 3 emissions. We did a little bit of it where we could grasp the information. On Scope 1 and 2, I would say we've been measuring it for so many years that we don't see any challenge in there, basically. And we've made already a lot of reductions since we started back in 2015. So to address this challenge, last year, we appointed South Pole to help us do an accounting of our Scope 3 and to help us as well develop new science-based targets with the objective, of course, of getting them endorsed by the Science Based Target Initiative or SBTi. So we're quite pleased. We got our targets endorsed last month by SBTi, again, putting our company, I would say, out there with other responsible companies taking commitments and getting these commitments and the basis of our targets basically being validated. We've got an absolute reduction of our scopes 1 and 2 by 50%. That reduction will be by 2030 from our 2018 base year. And Scope 3, so Scope 3 is something new for us. We've got two targets. First, a target that is called intensity target. We're looking at reduction of emission coming from hotspots. So for companies who are doing Scope 3 assessment, there is 15 categories, but usually you need to basically start to focus on where the impact is the biggest. So it's called a hotspot. For us, it's purchased goods and services, so typically how products are made. It's upstream transport and distribution, so how these goods come from our suppliers and are distributed to our warehouse, for example. And finally, the use of sold products, how customers use the product. So when you take a shower, with a shower gel, you not just need water, but you need electricity to heat up the water. So these three categories are very important for us, and this is where we're going to focus a lot of our efforts because we need to reduce the intensity by 58% by 2030. The other target, and that second target is still extremely important because it will support our intensity target. We are committing to engage at least 33% of our top suppliers by emission so that they set their own science-based targets by 2027. It's a very important mission for us, and it's a very big project. So starting next year, we are going to start collect what we call primary data from those suppliers. We know it's going to be a journey. It's not very easy, not just for us, but also for our suppliers. But we are going to accompany them, we're going to guide them, and we're going to use a third party for that purpose with an online platform. So far, we had already 3 major webinars with our top suppliers. And the first feedback I would say we had was very positive. We had a big participation. We had almost 90% of the suppliers who sent somebody with an agenda and questions. So we are quite optimistic on that project. Back to you, Amy.
Thank you, Sebastian. No, indeed, we've heard this several times as well elsewhere that, engaging the supply chain is a really a key milestone for many in terms of a deeper engagement into that decarbonization journey. Surely we'd like to also hear from Suhan as well to wrap this up. Suhan, any thoughts on this first question?
Yeah, thanks, Ami. It's great hearing from the earlier two speakers as well. There's a lot in common in terms of the challenges and successes. I'll share a bit more about Keppel Land and our view towards sustainability. So Keppel Land is a developer and provider of sustainable urban solutions, including real estate management, and we're pivoting into sustainable urban renewal for our brownfield developments. So we're part of the Keppel Group of companies, and with our Vision 2030, we're looking to decarbonize our portfolio assets by halving our emissions by 2025 and going net zero by 2030. So that's a couple of decades ahead of global goals. And it's, I think, fairly ambitious goals, but we're also actively pursuing them. Now, with decarbonization being front and center of real estate conversations, the challenge has always been to ensure that the developments we acquire and manage will themselves become carbon neutral en route to achieving the earlier Vision 2030 that I talked about. And this is also in tandem with global goals, especially for assets where we may not have full ownership and therefore full control. And those, I think, would be the challenging aspects. But where we found success is in establishing ourselves as a green developer, having recently been awarded second in the Asia Diversified Non-Listed category for GRESB, as well as the UN Global Compact Network Singapore APEX Sustainability Awards. This, of course, encompasses all three aspects of ESG, namely environmental, social, and governance as well. But back to Keppel Land, as our developments and solutions have an impact on multiple stakeholder groups, from governments to businesses to consumers, there would be more convergence rather than a divergence of strategies, meaning we don't necessarily isolate our B2B, B2C, and B2G. All that, of course, comes in as one confluenced strategy for our sustainability goals. And we therefore take a more holistic, I'd say, and integrated approach for sustainability and in helping our key stakeholders, including the planet, achieve our net zero ambitions. Back to you, Ami. Thank you.
Thank you, Suhan. All right, so I think with these three sharings that the three of you have provided us so far, I want to now turn to Shruti to pick her brain for a second. Shruti, I just want to ask you: do you think these sharings align with the main climate strategies that you are seeing in the market today from your vantage point at South Pole? And what are the nuances when it comes to thinking about what's been shared in terms of both near-term and long-term strategies? I'm also curious to hear, what other than what's been currently shared already, what are other leading companies leveraging on? Yeah.
Short answer is that yes, all of these findings absolutely align with what we see in the market, working with different companies. So we, of course, work with companies of different sizes, companies across sectors, and also companies which are in very different stages of their own climate journeys, right? Some are just starting out, whereas others are more advanced. So naturally, there are going to be some differences in challenges and actions as per the context, but the underlying themes that emerge out of these observations and these interactions, there are more similarities than differences, as Suhan also pointed out, that I think all of us are in this journey together, and the themes are quite similar. So one key point, and referring to what Sebastian said earlier, is that it is absolutely clear that more and more companies are now becoming aware that taking accountability of their scope 3 emissions is not an optional for them. And, this makes them really realize that the scope of their responsibility as a corporate goes much beyond the emissions impact of their direct operations, right? And this is a very big win, in my opinion, because of two reasons. The first one being that they suddenly see the size of this challenge in front of them, which is several times the size that they initially thought it was, right? Comparing direct and versus indirect emissions. And secondly, they realize that they really cannot achieve this goal alone. They have to engage with their upstream and downstream value chain partners. And as Sebastian also mentioned, we already see a lot of leading companies already embarking on this journey of engaging with their value chain partners, setting targets for them and working with them on finding solutions. So that's one. The second point, referring to what Vicky just mentioned, I think that companies find a lot of value in having a clear strategy in place in front of them. It may not have all the answers today, but it is still valuable to have an overview of what this journey is looking like for them. And, more importantly, identifying the gaps and which are the areas that they need to work towards. So that's another key theme that emerges out. Another point, also referring to what some of my co-panelists said, it's very important to bring everyone together on the same page. And hence, companies find a lot of value in engaging their stakeholders meaningfully, be it their own internal stakeholders through education or for building a business case for a potential initiative, engaging their investors through appropriate disclosures, also engaging their consumers or customers to keep themselves relevant for the business, right? So these are some of the key themes. And I think apart from that, there are two more important points that I would like to highlight. The first one is that we also see a lot of leading companies amplifying their impact by taking action beyond their value chains once they have committed to reducing emissions within their value chains and setting targets for the same and implementing solutions for the same and acting on them. So, it's important to mention that beyond value chain mitigation, which is when companies are acting or investing outside of their value chains, is not a substitute to investing within your own value chain. So your value chain has to be prioritized first, and only then you can go to beyond value chain as per the mitigation hierarchy, right? Companies do this we see that they do this primarily for two reasons. Number one, it's important for us to understand that not all of the global emissions are part of corporate supply chains. So there is a huge chunk of our planet's emissions which are outside of the corporate supply chain. So some leading companies are trying to amplify their action, their impact by contributing to the preservation of forests and ecosystems. And sometimes they're also investing in technologies which are quite nascent at this stage, such as avoidance technologies like green hydrogen, or even carbon removal technologies, which in due course are going to form a part of their own net zero journeys. So hence, I think this is another key trend that we see emerging. We also see companies realizing that nature is critical, and hence, recognizing the importance of setting biodiversity targets or nature-related targets, for example. So these are some of the trends that we see in the market.
Thank you. From what's been shared across the board today so far on this panel, I think something that's a nuance that I really want to dive deeper into is really about like how companies commit and take risks in this journey as well. Actually, when I was preparing for this event, I came across a quote from South Pole CEO. Actually, he said recently in a post that every ton counts, every fraction of a degree counts, and that we need risk-taking, real action, and investments in addition to pledges and promises. Now, I think a fair bit has already been shared on what you've alluded a fair bit basically on what the global state is, but I just wanted to check in with Vicky, Suhan, and Sebastian on your thoughts on whether this quote is an accurate reflection of the global state of climate ambition and claims being made by companies. If you'd like to chime in there too, perhaps Suhan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think the quote once again is every ton counts and every fraction of a degree counts. Is that right?
Yeah. And that we need risk-taking, real action, and investments.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I think I will introduce maybe two effects. The first is the roll-on effect of positive action, and it does show up in the real estate industry. For instance, in a recent report published by JLL, it basically states that rental premiums for green buildings could be anywhere between 4 to 28%, depending on how saturated the market is with green buildings, right? So obviously they basically command a premium because they are a differentiating aspect in that market, and there's value now that's being seen by tenants and by occupants already. Up to 28% in a market like Hong Kong, that's pretty significant. Of course, with Singapore, I think we're also quite comfortable with a good crop of green buildings, but that too can command a green premium. So every little step in this case does sort of lead to a compound or a roll-on effect. And this actually helps us push towards the development of greener buildings, as a higher rental yield now becomes a bigger carrot for investors. So what also happens is as the tide lifts, as the tide rises, it sort of uplifts the entire industry, because now you've got more market players when it comes to building solutions, when it comes to enterprise solutions as well. And that in the longer run could actually lead to higher market adaptability and also a lower cost of adoption. So that's an example of a roll-on effect. We also believe in number two, the compound effect. And that basically means that a small 1 degree deviation in course, for example, if you're, I don't know, if you're commandeering a ship, right? If your bearings are off by 1 degree, if you keep going 2 months down the road, you'll be in a completely different place. And likewise with sustainability, a 1 degree deviation in course, just correcting it just very little bit could cover actually a lot of distance, 10, 20, and certainly 50 years down the road. And drawing back once again to the sustainability goals that a lot of countries actually have in terms of decarbonisation by 2050. This is where we can make that 1 degree change right now, starting today.
Thank you, Suhan. Sebastian, I'd like to hear your thoughts next and what you think the global state of climate ambition among companies is looking like.
First of all, I do agree that every ton counts. I mean, at the end of the day, if you can sum up every ton saved by every company, I think we would be quite surprised by the numbers. But I cannot speak on behalf of course, all companies, but in our case, we know that decarbonization requires definitely a clear business strategy, investments to support all the intervention behind that. Because of course, companies who are, I would say, not yet in that journey need to understand that it's not just about getting some numbers coming out of a formula prepared by SBTi, which is still a good formula, but it's about what are you doing to do about it? What are the actions you're going to implement first in your operation, but then with your value chain? So I really believe that although every ton counts, companies still need to remain focused on the big prize. I mentioned earlier, hotspot. Hotspots are not there for no reason but to highlight the fact that there are areas where this is where most of your emissions are coming from. So if you really want to have to be part of a movement that basically will work into decarbonization, you need to look at that first. Companies don't have unlimited resources or unlimited investment to cover every single thing they need to focus on. So prioritization is key. It needs, of course, to be aligned where the impact is the biggest. During the webinar we had with our supplier, I've emphasized a lot on the fact that in this project, in this climate action that companies need to take, we are stronger together. So we need to really identify areas where we can work together to have a bigger impact, because the situation is not getting better. We know already that what we're doing is just about mitigating the risks, so avoiding longer period of environmental issues or stronger problems, I would say. We're not going to go back to pre-industrial areas. That's not possible. So we need really to work together. And I think this is really something that companies need to think of. Today, we're talking about decarbonization. It's a big word. Behind that, there's much more basically to put in place and to follow up.
Thank you, Sebastian. Vicky, do you have anything to add to that?
Okay, thank you. Probably the quote resonates with me as well, but I would like to focus on the need to do risk-taking, real action, and investment. When we were contemplating to commit to this net zero ambition, one of the CEOs told me that this is a real leap of faith, because 2022 to 2050 is a long time. And there will be a lot of assumptions that will go into the development of the roadmap for the Ayala Group. And some of the technologies, some of the things, the solutions are still nascent, as what Shruti mentioned a while ago. So it's possible that it will not be true in the next decade, but there is really that leap of faith that we can do it together. That's one. Real action, because we cannot just, I guess the time to understand the what and the why has been there. We're done with that. The next one is how to go about it, how to map out the real ambition for the group. And we are looking at the 11 verticals. So we have We have real estate, we have telco, we have banking, we have renewable energy with us, we have coal plants as well, we have the manufacturing group, we have the auto group, we have education, we have the healthcare, and recently we just added logistics in the portfolio. So there's a lot to look into. But I guess the leap of faith thing is there. And when we did that, we are committing to this with a real intention. And that's why we are investing a lot. For the Philippines, I will speak of my country because we believe that we have this potential to do renewable because we are in this part of Asia. We still have a lot of possibility to do wind turbine, solar. We have geothermal next to Indonesia. So biomass and the other things related to RE. And that's possible, that there's that possibility. So the main issue really is investment. We have to have access to financing to make all of this worthwhile and to make this possible for the country. And probably, who knows, we can still do something else in relation to nature-based solutions because we still have a lot of forests to protect in this part of the world. So I agree with the quote, and I agree that we need to do risk taking, to go for real action, and to really look for the investment that we need.
Thank you. Right. So far, I want to do two things as a sort of a pit stop before we continue. The first thing being that, earlier we had all of you audience log in through Slido to take the poll question. So now I just wanted to flag to you as well that you can actually start plonking in your Q&A questions there if you'd like. You can also plonk in your Q&A questions here via Zoom chat, which I would recommend, so that we will just see them immediately. Okay, so please go ahead and start flooding the chat box with the questions. Right, so now the second thing I'd like to flag is that, so far we've been talking a lot about action, and, I want to move into the communication bit soon, as, Shruti framed in the welcome address. We're talking a lot about the green, we're talking more and more about this green hush trend as well. So, to wrap up this action sort of thread that we've been on, I just want to canvas all of our speakers on any further thoughts on how companies like yourselves, or or in Shruti's case, perhaps, what are you seeing companies do to take that step from target setting to working on decarbonization efforts, and how companies balance the action between near and long-term targets. So Shruti, perhaps we'll start with you on that. Yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, sure, Ami. So definitely, the first and foremost step is to get the basics right? Have a credible emissions inventory, have your data organized, set your targets. But I think what we see more and more companies doing, and again, Vicky alluded to this in the first discussion, is that companies are really looking to build roadmaps of what this journey to meeting the targets looks like, both for the short term as well as for the long term. Like I mentioned earlier, it may be imperfect, and that is absolutely okay. You identify what you can do today. It helps you identify what you can do over the next couple of years with the right mindset and investments. And more importantly, it also helps you identify those strategic issues which require a completely different focus, maybe towards innovation, towards technological development, or towards changing the fundamental ways of how the business is operating. So this strategy in the first place is an extremely important step in moving from targets to actual implementation and decarbonization. It is, in fact, this strategy that helps to identify the investments that we talked about. And, what is the money that we are talking about? It's great to otherwise talk about different actions, but if we can't find the finances, then it's of no use, right? I think this strategy then feeds into how the companies are going to implement their mitigation activities, and it helps them to build that business case, to prioritize what they want to do today, to stagger their investments over the next few years if they need to, short-term, long-term, medium-term, and to, really go ahead with those business cases, create pilot projects to prove a point, to create narratives around what they have learned out of those successes or failures, and to move on this journey. So I think this is a very, very important step in moving from setting targets to actually doing something. I think what we also see is that companies are beginning to work a lot more with their industry partners in creating shared solutions towards some common problems. And I think there are many such examples, where one company alone is not going to cut it, and you have to collaborate with your industry if you are to make a real impact. What we also see is that companies are heavily beginning to invest in their own internal capacities and skill building, putting in place teams which can actually help them walk towards this decarbonization agenda that they have set for themselves. And apart from that, of course, as we also found in our net zero report, the budgets that the companies have allocated towards decarbonization activities have simply gone up. And they are really willing to invest in innovation, in research and development. I mean, we don't meet any company which is not already thinking in that direction. They may be in different stages, but they are doing something about it. And then finally, it's a delight to work with companies who have really taken that risk. And as Vicky mentioned, who have really taken that leap of faith because they have this strong ambition to change the status quo, either in their country or in their sectors, as in the case of, Watson or Keppel. So, yeah, I think these are some of the things that the companies are doing in moving from target setting to implementation.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So actually, I initially wanted to hear from the other panelists as well on thoughts on final thoughts on how we go from targets to actually working on decarbonization. So if you have any brief, if any of the three of you want to chime in briefly, please just cut me off. That's fine. But I actually would like to motion that we move on to the communication bit, because what Shruti mentioned on the necessity of companies putting out their narratives, in terms of the pilot projects, in terms of moving the needle, is how essential that is something that we want to probably talk about next. So that actually brings me to the next question, right? Go ahead. Yes, Vicky. Yes.
Probably, but just to add to what Shruti mentioned a while ago, we have the roadmap. But before we did the roadmap, what is essential to know also is like a peer benchmarking. Where are we in terms of the climate ambition? So per sector, so I have a real estate. So we choose the companies in the region and also global. So it's like this is something operational or something that we can aspire to achieve in the next how many years. And that actually sets also the roadmap, because now we have a benchmark and we know where we want to be. And because these benchmarks actually showed us what a good ambition looks like. That's the first thing that we did, because I guess people are looking into diving down into the details of developing the roadmap. But I would like to share that in our case, we did a peer benchmarking. So we choose companies within the region and also one company globally, and that's actually an aspirational one. And we can see how are we going to move forward? What are the things that we need to do? And that is per sector, because we have 11 sectors that we are working on at the moment. Just to add to what Shruti had mentioned a while ago.
And if I may jump in very quickly as well. Sorry.
Yeah. No, please.
Yes, benchmarking. I mean, Vicky, you're right. I mean, benchmarking is key. I mean, at least at the beginning, it's very important for companies to understand, okay, how much you measure it first. You measure your KPIs. You benchmark them outside with peers in the same industry to understand how far are you from what they are doing, understand what they are doing to give you some ideas. I mean, there's a lot of discussion we can have, but no time today to talk about materiality and others. But what's very critical, and Shruti talked about that, is definitely the fact that as a company, you need to be structured. I mentioned earlier, hotspot. You will have different projects, whether it's on scope one, whether you're looking at reducing the fuel in the fuel emissions from your fleets, whether it's about the electricity you have in your company, etc., etc. So you need to have really clear teams. And the way we've done it, it takes time, and that's why I would like to emphasize it's urgent. Don't think you can do it next year or push it a little bit further. You need to do it now. You need to structure your teams. For example, we have a global sustainability committee that oversees everything, that reports to the board, that has the full accountability of what's going on in the company. But accountability doesn't stop there. Accountability goes down in our company as well. So we've got subcommittees on energy, on supply chain. We've got a next gen subcommittee as well, because we need to understand the views of the next generations. Are we doing the right thing? Is it the right way of managing some of the problem we know? A roadmap, you mentioned the plan, Vicky, also. We need to roadmap. So we have a roadmap. It's a 2030 roadmap, again, near-term roadmap. But we believe that near-terms bring much more focus. People can understand. You can put it into context, basically. 2050 long-term is good, but my suggestion for companies who've never put any roadmap or plans, think about near-term. Long-term, basically, the risk, and we're talking about greenwashing and others, the risk is basically that if you come for the first time out there and you say, well, I've got my net zero plan for 2050, but you've never done anything before, a lot of companies will raise questions. How can you do it? You've never proven anything. You've not set a target in between to show that you can do something, that you can put intervention in places. So I think it's very important to think about that, cutting in piece, if you want, your plan. For us, it's every year. Every year we have a discussion with the markets. We get progress. We understand the progress versus the targets, and we revisit every year the plan for next year, because life is full of unexpectancies. I mean, nobody would have expected COVID. So we need to take that into account as well, and not just put it into 50 and say, well, let's see in a couple of years how to do it. But, yeah. Back to you, Annie.
Yeah, I think Ami, if I can also share a little bit, because it would be remiss of me to not talk about action in a panel about ambitious action and jump right into communications. So what we do try to do with Keppel Land is we've started the Sustainable Urban Renewal Program, or the SUR program, SUR, and it looks at acquiring aging commercial assets and transforming them into sustainable assets for downstream management, operation, and also potential divestment. So it's basically asset enhancement with a sustainability mandate, giving a new lease of life to a building by not demolishing it and therefore saving its embodied carbon in the process. And sometimes the best action is to take minimal action, especially when it comes to building and when it comes to preservation of existing buildings. But through this program, we reduce the carbon emissions of existing buildings by at least 20%, and also ensuring that they fall within the CRREM guidelines, that's CRREM, ensuring that Keppel's portfolio of assets can become net zero, once again, in line with the corporate vision. And that is through continual improvement of the asset and indeed the portfolio of assets over time. So it therefore allows for investments to be paid back within an industry-leading payback period, while gaining from avoided carbon and reduced carbon taxes. So that's how action basically is a direct outcome of the targets. And in setting these targets, they translate directly into building performance that translate into earnings in the near to midterm, that then translate towards our decarbonization goals in the long term. Back to you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for sharing. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we've talked a lot about action, and let's start to go to the communication bit. Thanks for jumping in. I didn't realize that all of you were burning to share. My apologies on that. All right, so I want to actually now hop onto the communication bit. I know Shruti has mentioned this earlier several times, referring to that net zero report by South Pole that found that an increasing number of companies are supporting net zero commitments, but only a quarter of them are planning to talk about it. And thinking about how it is necessary to put the narrative out there, the question remains, do you actually see this happening in your day-to-day, in terms of companies feeling they cannot really, they are not feeling empowered enough to speak on their sustainability plan? And if so, how is it affecting the corporate climate journey? And finally, if you could also share, how should companies, in light of this trend, talk about their action that they're taking in a transparent and credible way? So I want to actually address this to Vicky, Suhan, and Sebastian once again. Sebastian, perhaps we can start with you this time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So with regard to transparency or sharing information on sustainability, I would say there are different factors that can influence a company. So first of all, when we look just at the regulatory framework or the reporting format, it's a jungle out there. I mean, you can talk to any ESG experts. You have so many different formats required by multiple investors. I've got friends working in big conglomerates, and they spend literally month or half of their years basically just doing reporting. That's the complexity today we have as companies as well. But we have to do it. It's important. In our case, we are not a listed company, so our holding, accusations, is listed in Hong Kong and has been reporting on non-financial information already for a couple of years. And the way they structure their data, basically, we report everything with them, basically. So our report is combined with them. However, with our new SBTs endorsed by SBTi, we'll have our own report because we need to have it as well on our corporate website. And it's important for us also to basically provide much more information. In terms of transparency, it's also very important to be open and honest with what's happening. Reductions are great, but sometimes reductions don't happen. There is a reason for that, so we have to explain as well why the reductions don't happen. The plan will be shared as well, but it's also important to take into consideration the fact that we see more and more companies reporting today, and recently, the Hong Kong Exchange published a report about listed companies who reported last year, and understanding basically how far do they go in their reports, how structured are they, how much information is available. You see improvement. So it's getting there. More and more companies understand the need to be transparent, the need to share this data. But it's important also to make sure that at some point, we hope that in more markets, we're going to see alignment as well on the reporting format. Just to give you an example, for us in Hong Kong, today it's an ESG format. It's going to be TCFD pretty soon. Singapore, where another shareholder of a company is listed, it's going to be TCFD, with TCFD in the UK with the business over there. And then you've got the European Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is even bigger in terms of scope, because they will not encompass only listed companies or large companies. They will encompass by 2027 as well SMEs. So we see legislation getting more stringent, but we hope to see soon, I would say, alignment in terms of the reporting, mostly for companies who have really reached in different markets where you can have basically to almost publish data in a different way.
Fantastic, thank you. Suhan, what about you? What are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, so the question once again was greenwashing as a mode of prevention of or mode of avoidance of greenwashing. Is that right?
Yeah, and how do you think companies can move forward communicating with transparency and credibility in that regard? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of those damned if you do and damned if you don't type of situations, because if you underreport, then you're accused of greenwashing. If you overreport, you're accused potentially of greenwashing. So I think to go back to the original word cloud that began this whole forum, I'd say authenticity and accountability. Just be authentic about what you do. Do not overcommit. If you can't achieve it, do not overpromise if you can't fulfill it, and certainly do not overreport. So I guess from the Keppel Land perspective, we do not and cannot run away from our sustainability performance metrics and measurement, because I think with real estate, sometimes it does get a lot more tangible because these assets have to be measured. And if we run away from these metrics, they would have a direct impact on the performance of our assets. Not to mention that these metrics and these performance requirements are already inherent and baked into our underwriting for investment deals, right? So even if the climate activists or eco business or the general public doesn't come after us, the investors will. So as such, we endeavor to be as transparent as we can about reporting. And just as we do report our overperformance, remember I started out by talking about awards and so on, we also don't shy away from reporting any underperformance and the challenges that comes with that. Given that earlier Shruti and Vicky and so many of us did mention about the extension beyond the value chain, and there's so much of the value chain, both within and without, whose carbon emissions we sometimes cannot control. In any case, we try to calibrate our goals, our KPIs, and our OKRs, which are outcomes and key results, for the next year if we fail to achieve a particular target in any particular year. So there's actually quite a bit of internal post-mortem that goes on. the accountability is quite high because we do have to report to multiple layers of stakeholders, including our own management and also our external stakeholders. In any case, we pride ourselves on the transparency of our reporting, as ultimately we might be accountable to stakeholders and so on, but ultimately we're all accountable to the planet, and the environment is, after all, our biggest stakeholder.
Thank you, Suhan. Vicky, what are your thoughts on this green hush trend and how companies, perhaps such as yourself, are moving forward?
Actually, the fear is real because we have seen a lot of cases globally, like Nestle, Shell. They have been brought into the court because of their climate ambition. So we studied that very carefully. That's why at the beginning of the engagement, or before we did a commitment, we had a session to understand what is that targets that we want to put out there, and do we really commit into that. So we look at what is carbon neutrality, what is this and that. But with the guidance of South Pole, we actually commit to the gold standard, which is net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. It is not only carbon, but we are talking of the 6 types of greenhouse gas as defined under the Kyoto Protocol. And it is net zero, not being neutral. That means everything, and it is also possible that we cannot mitigate or reduce the emissions. There will be the 10% that we need to do some offsetting or some avoidance. So I guess that's the first thing that we did, because we are very much aware of what's going on at the global arena, where companies are being brought to court because of those climate ambitions. We studied that very carefully. And so in all the speeches, in all the publications or press releases of the company or even across the group, we always say it's net zero greenhouse gas emission. It is not net zero carbon. That's one. And the other thing that we did is that every quarter we have like a cadence meeting together with our service provider, in this case, South Pole, on what can we actually communicate publicly and how are we going to communicate that. Again, we want to be guided because there's a lot of terms out there, and we want to make sure that we are using the right term. For us, and because of that understanding, or because of the confirmation that we are using the right term, we are somehow beyond the fear anymore. We are into that, okay, let's do this. It's action time because we know we have the right target. I guess that settles that fear. But from time to time, we are still scanning, and we continuously scan the environment for what's happening in the global arena in terms of the climate journey of the other companies. And I guess we want to learn from the failures, because every failure is an opportunity to improve internally and to improve our processes as well. Transparency is key. So, but through the investor relations team, we communicate to our investors what's happening with our climate ambition. And then they realize that we are such a big group. They thought that we can do it in 1 year. Unfortunately, we cannot. We need 2 years for us at Ayala Corporation, the parent company, to develop the roadmap. So, and right now, I don't know if that 2 years, that's the initial target. Probably there will be some issues, because as we speak right now, there are issues with the scope 3 because of lack of data. Again, that's another factor that we have to put into the communication. And there's a lot of recalibration going on. So what I realized along the way is that, for example, I have coal, and then all of a sudden, there is at that ETM, energy transition mechanism. We cannot say that we have reduced our scope 1. We cannot do that. What we need to do is to recalibrate our baseline. So on that note, actually, if you follow the process, there is no greenwashing if you follow it correctly. If you don't follow, then there is that greenwashing. There is a specific, I guess the climate journey is more mature than the nature journey because we have science, it's backed up with the GHG accounting protocol, and the science-based targets initiatives is also quite mature, and they have guidance for every sector on how to achieve the climate journey or the climate ambition.
Yeah,
So
I like
the
that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
right, so the fear is real at the beginning, but as you move along and you understand it very well, I guess you are becoming more confident in the way you communicate to your stakeholders.
No, I was just gonna say that I really love that ending note that you provided us, because that's actually what's on my mind as well. Thinking about how companies, or perhaps people in the audience today might be thinking about that fear that you've been bringing it up, and is it worth tackling that fear to kind of like approach this pathway that's already in a way more getting more and more tried and tested, as you mentioned, SBTI and etc. So actually, I just want to turn to Shruti to actually help us connect the dots there, on how Shruti, how do you see increased corporate communication of climate targets and progress? How do you think that can lead to more ambitious targets being set and increased opportunities for industries to collaborate, perhaps? If more and more companies can overcome this fear, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Ami. I think a few things come to my mind. Number one is yes, companies need to overcome this fear and transparently communicate the targets that they're setting and also the measured progress that they're making. Because we need to remember that peer pressure can be a very strong driver for other companies to set their targets and to embark on their own journeys, as Vicky rightly mentioned. And in fact, our research pointed out towards the same thing, that it's one of the strongest drivers for companies to actually set their own targets. And it's very important for companies who are more advanced on these journeys to lead from the front and to show that great example and to set that example in front of their industry peers or in front of the value chain partners. So that's number one. It's a very strong driver. The second one is that I think increased communication on targets and the journeys that the companies have undertaken can also improve knowledge sharing within the sectors in general. And I think this gives an opportunity for different businesses to then collaborate on decarbonization. I think it's very, very important for us to remember that we are really out of time. I think we don't acknowledge that on a day-to-day basis, but we are really out of time when it comes to meeting the global goals. And hence, we cannot afford to have all the different companies scrambling to figure out all by themselves, what is it that they need to do. It is very important that we learn from each other's experiences, from failures, from success stories, as we mentioned before this. So these open conversations, credible communication about targets are really, really important. I think another thing is that, if companies do not publicly communicate about their targets and they really green hush, it makes it so much harder to scrutinize the progress that they are making against those targets. And this in turn, could be one of their fears for not communicating these targets. But in the absence of this scrutiny or, tracking the progress against these targets, it also gives a very false impression to the public eye that the leaders are not really leading on this aspect. And so, it's a vicious circle. Companies do not disclose because of certain reasons. Others perceive that companies are not disclosing, hence they are probably not acting enough. And then, they do not follow the knowledge that's being built over there, and they do not follow lead from their peers. So it's all a vicious circle. And hence it's super important that companies communicate from the front and feel comfortable talking about their journeys, success, failures, everything.
Thank you. No, certainly, I think I definitely have to agree with that as well. And, to really wrap up this conversation, I'd like to actually bring back the question that we asked the audience in the beginning to sort of, see what the panelists have in mind in terms of this question as well. So I'm going to ask it to you as well, all of you. So to wrap up and to put a cap on this conversation, all of you, in 30 seconds or so, what do you think is the one thing that climate leaders can do today to set a good example for others, whether it's in the industry or value chains, etc.? So Suhan, perhaps I'll start with you.
All right, I guess my time starts now.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So I think in 30 seconds or less, we need to acknowledge that just as not every organization can be a nonprofit charity organization, not every corporate organization's reason for being is for sustainability. Having said that, corporates really do need to think in environmental terms, but likewise, climate leaders and activists also need to think in corporate terms as well. And maybe while never the twain shall meet, we can come to a comfortable middle ground as to what constitutes truthful reporting, what constitutes positive action, and what also could constitute corrective action. So I guess in summary, it works both ways, and neither would exist in a vacuum.
Thank you. Vicky, how about you?
Probably we have said a lot related to the what and the why. So now that we know, we cannot unknow. So we have to act. And the time is short. And I think we are late. So act now. Start your first big move, and that is to commit to the gold standard of net zero.
Thank
Just
you,
that.
Vicky. Sebastian, how about you?
Well, to keep it short, I think the key message today for me is really if there are companies out there wondering how to do it. So it's not so much how to do it first, but it's yes, you have to do it. Definitely, it's urgent. So companies need to take actions, not next month, not next year. Now it's very important to start, and also not to be afraid of not knowing. At the end of the day, I think there are in every market where we are enough knowledge, enough organization who can support these companies basically in their journey, and that's what they need. They need a plan. So if they don't have the resource to make a plan, they can engage external companies for that. And in Hong Kong, for example, myself, very often I will talk to other companies as well, basically to share a little bit our journey. I had a panel discussion with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange to talk about the journey. And it's important that companies understand it's not easy. If it was easy, honestly, we would not be where we are today. It's complex. But the more we share, the more basically all together we can basically address these challenges.
Thank you. Shruti, how about you to end this?
Yeah, I think that companies need to stop thinking that acting on climate change or on sustainability on the whole is the job of the sustainability department within the company. I think this should be a key lens through which all business decisions need to be evaluated going ahead, of course. And all the BUs, all the different units need to be made accountable for all the decisions that they take. So I think accountability and working collaboratively within the company are some of the key thoughts.
Thank you. All right. So, audience members, there you have it. An hour of discussion with our esteemed speakers here. Vicky from Ayala Corp, Tan Soo Han from Keppel Land, Sebastian Pivet from A.S. Watson, and Shruti Singh from South Pole. Thank you so much to our speakers for that. Now we're going to go into our question and answers segment. So for about 20 minutes or so, we're going to take a few of the questions in the chat box. I've also kind of looked at the Slido platform as well to see if we missed any questions there. And I have all the questions over here. So the first question I actually want to zoom in is one from Robin Hicks. It caught my eye because it is a sort of a nuance that I like to hear more of. I think it is a question on culture. Let's see what you think. The question is, does the panel think that green hush is more of an issue in Asia, where companies are perhaps not as inclined to chest beat about their sustainability achievements as firms in the West? I think, yeah, I would actually like to hear a bit more on this. So if any of you are inclined to take this question, please, it's yours. Anyone?
I think maybe I'll try to start. Yeah, I think it's also a function of the scale of the company, because I think Shruti mentioned that sustainability should not just be the role of the sustainability department or the sustainability staff within a company. And indeed, while that is true, the reality is it is the sustainability department that tends to author these reports, that tends to gather the data and tries to interpret it in a way that then makes sort of business insight type of sense for their financial planning, possibly. Now, in order for companies to be able to do this, they have to be sizable enough to even have a sustainability department in the first place, and that isn't always true for many companies. So that is one. The second aspect is also that a lot of companies, I mean, everyone's familiar with a financial report, financial auditing, and also I suppose the fiduciary responsibilities that they will therefore have to their shareholders or their stakeholders in producing these reports. Not so much yet for sustainability reports, although that is changing as a mode of responsible practice, as a mode of good practice, but not necessarily as a mode of compliant or required practice. And until that changes, we would still be seeing companies falling short in the sustainability reporting aspect. So maybe cultural, but I would venture to think that it is because of other possibilities and constraints as well.
Probably I'll follow after Suhan. In our case, in the Philippines, our Philippine Stock Exchange has already required the publicly listed companies to start reporting on their non-financial performance starting 2019. So the driver to do sustainability reporting is not only the investor, but for the Ayala Group, we have started the reporting way back a decade before actually the SEC mandated all the publicly listed companies to do the ESG reporting. The main reason for that is probably, yeah, it's cultural, and probably it's because our principals, our main shareholder, the Ayala family, they believe that if you report on something that's out there, you have now a more conscious, there is an awareness that you have to do better because you are reporting publicly. That's one. And I guess earlier on, even before I joined the company, they were even until now, they are very actively engaging with the investors, so they know what are the requirements of the investors that actually shape our reporting framework within the group. And then of course the other one is compliance. More recently with TCFD as part of the framework, we see it more on the risk management side because these are the external factors that will impact the achievement of the objectives of the company. So there is that inside out framework that's using GRI and SASB, and the outside in framework, the TCFD, and the other TNFD, TIFD that's coming online soon. But with the harmonization of these frameworks through the works of the IFRS and the ISSB, I guess there is more compelling reasons for us to do our reporting properly and accurately or reasonably, because there is now comparability, and those who are reporting very well or they have the good data, they will be rewarded. That's my belief, no? Because now the data will be comparable, and so the investors can actually include you in their capital allocation process. That's it. Thank you.
I'll just jump in quickly. Well, I don't think greenwashing. I mean, greenwashing is seen because we are all in Asia, so we see it maybe more frequently. But the main difference for me, I've been in Asia now for 22 years, and indeed over the last 22 years, you've seen a different evolution when it comes to mandatory reporting, non-financial reporting, etc. You could say that Europe, US had many legislations ahead of Asia, but Asia is catching up very quickly. The latest TCFD for most markets in Asia is a sign of investors saying we need to basically put a framework, we need people to basically report the same way. But greenwashing on companies often came historically in Asia from the fact that large organization, household names basically are an easy target. Just like in Europe, household names basically would be a target whenever somebody wants to talk about a particular topic. Yeah. And of course, the risk out of that, and maybe unexpected risk, is basically that when companies are targeted too often on certain topic, then they'd rather not talk about it, basically. So it has a negative effect as well on this transparency. I think at the end of the day, for companies who are in this situation, and frankly, we were also like that many years ago in this situation, but we took the initiative to say, no, we're going to talk about it, we're going to address it, we're going to have a genuine conversations. And we've change, I would say, for some of the companies that targeted us many years ago. Today we work together, but we had to find ground where we can have a genuine conversation and share progress, and not just basically being pointed out and blamed for everything. Companies are genuinely making efforts, and I think that's the key message behind that. So greenwashing for me is seen in Europe, is seen in Asia, is seen in the US. I would not say it's a region specific, but historically it might have been more frequent in this part of the world.
Thank you so much. Shruti, you had something to add?
Yes, please. I think I'm very keen to throw in some statistics around that. And even though I don't have the number for Asia, I can speak for Singapore that the number for greenwashing, the percentage is actually lower in Singapore among companies with net zero targets as compared to the global number. Now, as some of you pointed out, it's very important to, number one, really understand what greenwashing is, and number two, also understand the reasons for greenwashing. To answer the first one, to the first point, greenwashing is not about companies not meeting their regulatory reporting requirements. It is about companies not going above and beyond what is really mandated for them to disclose, and not really talking about their targets and their progress beyond what regulations require them to do. And then number two, it's important to understand the reasons why companies greenwash. And Sebastian, you said it right. It could be because of increased scrutiny. It could be also due to some climate litigations, which, as we know, can be prevalent in some countries more than the others. So I think it could also be because of fear of failure, right? Some companies are silently choosing to act rather than, beating their trumpets over saying what we are doing, because they may have fear that they may not be able to deliver on the targets that they have set for themselves. And these are all anecdotal reasons that I'm talking about, and there is no evidence for any of these. So yeah, I mean, while it could be a cultural thing, while we may perceive that it could be a cultural thing for companies in Asia to not openly talk about what they are doing, actually, our research says that the companies, at least in Singapore, I don't have the numbers for Asia, are being more open in talking about the targets that they're setting and the progress that they're making.
Right, thank you. All right, so the second question that's caught my eye, I think, actually, I'm going to direct this one to you, Shruti. So I'm going to keep you on the line here. It's the one from Lisa Siganto, and it asks, how do you encourage corporate investment into innovative climate and nature solutions? Of course, the other panelists, please also chime in if you like as well. Shruti, your thoughts?
I think my thought here would be that you really have to show them the clear picture, right? You really have to define the reason for why they need to invest in these innovative nature-based solutions or technological solutions. How does it fit into their own strategy towards either decarbonisation or towards their net zero targets? So as I alluded to earlier during one of the answers to your questions, Ami, for example, carbon removal technologies. Companies rarely understand today that if they are to be net zero, this is going to be an integral part towards meeting their neutralization targets as they move towards their net zero targets. So you really have to link up the value of these investments to the company's own strategy in order to motivate them to make that investment.
Thank you. Anyone else like to chime in on that?
Probably on my side, if you will commit to the net zero target, then there is that portion where you have to do intervention assessment. And in that particular work stream, you will understand what can you still do for you to do to meet the reduction of your greenhouse gas emissions. So naturally, a portion of that will be related to the investments into new technologies or solutions. And if you follow SBTI, 90% you have to reduce, 10% you can use nature-based solutions as an offset. So the first thing that you need to do is to understand what is your commitment. And if you do commit to the net zero target, then all of these things will just flow naturally.
Yeah, I would also add that any corporate investment in innovation and climate solutions and nature solutions as well is really putting a bit of an insurance premium on preventing future obsolescence. And it is therefore necessary for corporates to do that to ensure their own survival.
All right. Yes, Sebastian.
You saw me on mute, okay. I mean, definitely depends on the targets you set. Okay, Vicky mentioned that very clearly. If you do a near-term target or if you do a net zero, you will have a different approach to, I would say, offsetting. There are things that you can offset, other things you cannot offset. Should we encourage corporate investment into innovative climate and nature solutions? Yes, definitely, but the right ones. Briefly, I will just tell you that since we took SBTI, I've received so many emails of companies wanting to send me offsets all over the world because they think that SBTI or science-based targets, if I want to reach them, it's only about offset. No, offset is only coming at the end. You start first by reducing, and reductions are the priority of any target, and then only you offset. So we encourage it, but you have to encourage the right one. So for example, when it comes to energy reduction, yes, you invest. The low-hanging fruits that even in Asia today, I'm quite surprised. There are a lot of companies, SMEs usually, who don't realize that switching to LED lights already brings a benefit to consumption and a direct financial benefit to the company, basically. So there is a lot of other things you can do, very easy. Some are more expensive, will take times. And of course, this now will depend within each corporation. There is a different finance mechanism around return on investment, etc., that sometimes can put hurdles into those investments. But the reality is that as long as those investments help you in a journey, yes, this is when the discussion needs to happen in your company. And you need to engage also the finance team. So we talked previously of having different teams. A team is not just a procurement team, is not just a supply chain team. It's also a finance team. Your finance as well, just like also your HR, to train people, to raise awareness. The finance team needs to be on board of your targets and what you want to achieve. And then you will have ways, I would say, to make those hurdles slowly disappear.
Maybe I want to add one more point there, building on some of the comments that I heard just now. I think companies acknowledge the price that they have to pay if they do not act today, but very often do they associate that price with what they are doing today. So I think internal carbon pricing can be a very powerful motivator for companies to already start investing in these climate or technological or nature-based solutions. And there are several ways of defining that internal carbon pricing. And it's up to the company to choose the right approach. It could be more inside out or outside in. But I think that really helps you to put a price on all the emissions that you have today attributable to your company, and to start thinking about what is the potential price that you have to pay tomorrow. Should there be a need for you to pay taxes, or should there be any other regulatory requirement which requires an outflow from your end? So that's another thought to add there.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts on that. I'm going to pick potentially our last question. We'll see if we have any more time for a fourth, but I potentially going to signal this as the last one. And it's the one on the green skill shortage. So for a different perspective here, and it's coming from, scrolling up right now, give me a second. It's coming from Ruchi. So Ruchi has asked, have you witnessed a green skill shortage as a barrier to green industry transformation? Once again, open to all of you. I think, Shruti, you have this grin on your face. You'd like to take this first?
Yeah, we are a climate solutions provider, and our assets is the manpower that we have. And I can definitely say that, yes, green skills in general is a little bit in shortage as compared to the industry transformation that we are seeing, and rightfully so, right? A decade ago we were not talking about green skills, and there were just a handful of people working in this space, and today suddenly we have companies taking action, companies embarking on journeys. So it's everywhere. And I think the short answer here is that, yes, there is a little bit of shortage, but then we also need to look at it more optimistically. And referring to what I said earlier, green skills need to be need not reside just with people who have traditionally worked in those departments, and they need to be percolated down to each and every department. And this is the time for people from other departments to develop those green skills, and organically, inorganically, and to embark on this journey.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Probably I will talk specifically of our energy transition mechanism that was just concluded a week ago. And that is the first one in the world, the energy transition mechanism of ASEAN. So we have this coal power plant. So through the energy transition mechanism, instead of 2055, the coal plant will shut down by 2040. Just for the sake of discussion, we have about 200 people probably in that operation. So what are we going to do with these 200 people? So as early as now, we have to make sure that they are cross-posted to the other AC renewable plants, because we cannot. We have to make sure that they have something to do, and they are there is that continuous reskilling and upskilling in the process, because by 2040 the plant will be shut down. And so what are we going to do with these people? I believe that we cannot do a climate transition without the just or the social transition. This goes hand in hand. So for every technology that we put out there, we have to make sure that people who will be using the technology will be reskilled. And those people who will be bumped off because of this technology, we have to find ways how we can put them in other parts of the organization where they can really feel that they are contributing. We don't want them to be demotivated, because that is not a just transition. So I guess it is inevitable that for us who are talking about this climate transition, we have always to make sure that the people will be part of that journey. The just transition is about the climate and the people, and even the community that is involved in that particular operation. There.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe I'll just share very quickly that a green skill isn't something that's beholden onto anyone in particular. And I say this from my own personal background as an architect. And I think with green skills, it's not so much, of course, you've got university degrees specializing in these sorts of skills now, but it is by and large fairly logical. By and large, if you've graduated with a base degree, or even if you've completed secondary school, you'd be able to pick up quite a bit of the required sustainability skills, for instance, in reporting, as well as the accounting in some cases of carbon. So it's more of the shortage of upskilling opportunities as it is a shortage of skills potentially, and that's something that corporates can also look into.
Thank you. I
Yep.
think if there's no other thoughts on that. Sebastian, did you have a thought on that? Sorry.
Oh, just quickly, sorry. to
No,
cut it
no
short.
worries. We have time.
So yes, green skills are very important. And I mean, all the panelists have said it. At the end of the day, you're not born green. You're not born with an expertise in everything. Everybody has followed different streams. You came from architecture, you come from finance, you come from marketing. And what I tell my colleagues is at the end of the day, they can become experts if they want to become expert in their own field. Sustainability is an add-on to your job, basically. We spend a lot of time within organization to train, to give awareness. We started with, of course, the top management to get the awareness, but we slowly go down and really grasp and talk to a lot more colleagues. And even within my team in Hong Kong, we see, I would say, a skill shortage, because, of course, if you're looking for somebody with 10, 15 years experience in sustainability, it's very difficult to find it in some market, honestly. But for us, we prefer to look at people who have a passion. They are passionate. They really want to solve problems. They have an expertise, because at the end of the day, you need to have an expertise somewhere. It can be finance. If you have an expertise in finance, you can still have, I mean, sustainability is a lot about numbers, and there's a lot of modeling to do. So that expertise can be used there. So there is a shortage, but I think the shortage can be addressed internally by providing the right training, identifying the right training for the right people, and understanding that sustainability for us is not a team of people that get basically dropped all the sustainability responsibilities. No, there's a core team, definitely. My team is very small. With me, we are basically 4.5, because I've got to have an account somewhere else at group level. But in fact, we are a company of about 130,000 people. So potentially, what I see, I can have 130,000 specialists in their own field on sustainability. So for me, I see more opportunities within our organization today. And if I need that external opportunities, I don't mind recruiting a young graduate, as long as the person has a skill to propose and is passionate and really want to go in and embark in that journey.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think to
Yeah, go
that,
ahead.
you know, out of the whole plethora of conferences, forums, and so on, one of the best quotes I've heard this year was from a close friend and associate, and that was, "Do not look for a green job. Look for ways of making your job green." And that's probably very consistent with what Sebastian has just shared.
That was a very nice way to end the event actually. So I think we're gonna actually leave it there. There was this one more. I want to give a special mention to this question. We're probably not gonna take it unless any of you want to really jump at it on corporate vulnerability. A corporate vulnerability where companies are generally honest about the challenges of achieving net zero and talk about the mistakes they make along the way so that other companies might learn from them. And the question really asks if that is genuine climate leadership. I'm going to riff off that and also take what Suhan has said about, turning your job green instead of looking for a green job, in bringing that authenticity and vulnerability and thinking about how that transformation can come from what you do in your job, what your department does, and then what your whole company does as a group. I say all this also because, in the last 90 minutes, I've heard a lot about our speakers talking about how it is a great challenge for companies to actually think about, for big companies, for example, moving from a departmental strategy to that of a group, people like Vicky, Sebastian, Suhan, you've all touched on this as in different kind of hues and different kind of shades. It's really much easier said than done. And there's also a cultural piece there of how, it's beyond, it's beyond the demand, the what companies do here is beyond taking an ESG checklist, off. It is more of a cultural shift that we need to think about as well. Two other things that really caught my mind, really caught my attention rather. The first one, really very clearly data is an issue here as well. We need, what I hear from the last 90 minutes is that we need more data from people like suppliers, as well as the ecosystem at large, in terms of how to move forward. And that also depends on your industry. Finally, one last thing that really was prominent for me is the education piece. I think, it wasn't really, put outright that, we didn't talk about education directly, but I think in every response for every question, there was a shade of that as well coming out in terms of how, for example, customers are part of the solution, in terms of how governments can better support these companies. And finally, as well, when at the very end, I think I also heard a bit about how carbon pricing, the price of carbon offsets, for example, can be taken, as a signal in terms of what that price of today's delay could be on tomorrow's world. So I think all of that I'm going to walk away with. I wonder, rather I hope that you walk away with something as well from these 90 minutes. Before we end, I'd like to do two things. One is to really thank our panelists once again. Thank you for making the time to join us today and to share with our audience on what ambitious action and credible communication looks like for companies going on their net zero journey. The second thing really I'd like to ask is actually panelists, if we could actually take a photo. So I'll just get you to smile at your screen. I hope you don't have any colleagues staring at you in your office. Oh, is this guy, is this woman okay? Just smile at your screen and my colleague will take a screenshot in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, thanks, Ben. Ben is our guy in the background running this as well. And last but not least, thank you to all of you audience for joining us from wherever you are in the world. I hope that we have left you satiated with the insights that our generous panelists here have shared with us today. And with that, I'd like to end our session right on the dot 5:30 p.m. and wish you a pleasant evening ahead. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone.